General Yeager is our pal. He's been here before. He's kind of an honorary Hoosier to us, and he comes every year. And all of you know of some of this man's accomplishments. He's really done it all. And as I said last night, maybe we can get him to. I told him what to talk about last night. I'm not going to try to get away with it twice. He can talk about whatever he wants. But would you give a hand for a great American hero, General Chester?
Like I said in the hangar out there, it's been a hell of a long time since the sheriff tried to buy favors off some gal. But he gives me $10 to buy with. I also was sitting in his office when the phone rang, and the sheriff answered it, his secretary, Italian gal, and said, "You got a call from an irate citizen." He said, picked the phone, and Sheriff McAtee. No. Did you get his license number? And he, well, damn, I'll talk to him. Somebody been riding a motorcycle down the street standing on a seat. Sheriff said, I got to straighten this outfit out. Next time you get his license number, and I'll take care of him. So, anyway, I've had a wonderful time back here with a lot of the guys, and especially the guys on the drill team, and Ballistic Bob here has escorted us around, and all the pilots that came here, like Connie and Ed and Gary Honberger. Last year, Gary rode from the dirt track out where A.J. Foyt puts on his race back into town with Ballistic Bob here, and I don't think Gary's eyes have ever shone down where they were. But anyway, last night Andy and I were talking about some of the things we did where we had fun, and basically he told about shooting down his first airplane. I'd like to tell you about the first airplane I shot down. And first, how many of y'all were there last night? Hold up your hands. Okay. Andy, it went over pretty good, so I'll tell it again. Andy wrote his book, and he asked me to write forward for it. And I said, well, let me read the book first. And he sent me the manuscript, and I was reading to it. And we got together, and I said, God damn it, Andy, you're some of these dog fights you had, they're not the way I remember. You know, go back and get your encounter reports when you come back from a mission and shot an airplane down. It'll fill out an encounter report with intelligence guys and read that thing. It's just not quite exactly right. So he pulled out these old encounter reports we were going over, said, damn, you're right. And he changed the encounter reports. Anyway, the first airplane I shot down was on March 5th, 1944. No, it's March 4th, because I got shot down on March 5th. And it was the first daylight raid on Berlin. And there were only 2 Mustang groups in Europe at that time. The 354th was in 9th Air Force, and we were the first Mustangs in 8th Air Force. And we got off with 48 Mustangs, three squadrons of 16 each. And the day we went on that mission, it was stinking weather at our base. And the way they scramble you off is the whole fighter group fires up and checks in each squadron, and you taxi from your squadron area in flights of 2, or in elements of 2 around, and they feed you onto the runway, and there's one of the ops officers out there with the flag, and he waves off 2 airplanes every 8 seconds. And on that particular day, it was about a 500-foot overcast and about a mile and a half or 2 miles in visibility with snow and fog. And when you get into the overcast, you're locked in on your guy's wing, and you climb until you break out on top. And guys, Christ, it's really a mess. break out about 28, 30,000 feet, and you really don't know who's where, what's going on, except you find an airplane and you crawl on his wing and head off on the mission. And I recall breaking out on top by myself. I was only a flight officer, I was a wingman, and I saw a guy and I latched onto him, and he didn't seem to want to lead too much, so I flew lead and he got on my wing. And we gathered up and just sort of started mingling in with the pilots, and we picked up a box of bombers. And for the first time, there was a recall that one box of B-17s and a B-24 box didn't get the recall because the weather was bad over Berlin, and they just scrubbed the whole mission. But these two boxes of bombers didn't get the recall, and our group just sort of stayed with them all the way to Berlin, and it was stinking weather up to about 25, 28,000 feet, and broken and towering Q. And these guys went in and dropped their bombs, and we were coming back out of Berlin, and I looked down, and there's a ME-109, and damn, that thing looks just like the pictures. He was about 6,000 or 7,000 feet below me. And I remember running everything up wide open on my B-51 and start diving at him as fast as I could go, and had the gun switches on. And man, that airplane just got bigger and bigger real fast. And I said, I got a problem. I better slow this thing down. And I cut the power all the way back, and I was just really scooting up his butt. I pulled the airplane up and did a big roll and slowed down and pulled him behind him, and evidently he didn't see me. And I pulled him behind him, put the bead, we had a ringing bead gun sight, put the bead on him, started to pull the trigger, and I said, if big hunks come off that guy, I'm gonna get knocked down the sky. So I dropped down under him, pulled the nose up, and then started shooting. And pieces flew off of him, and he flew into a million pieces. That was my first airplane. Next day I wasn't a chaser, I was a chasee and got shot down. But from that one time of having a ringing and bead gun sight in the 50s and a P-51, some 51 years later, 2 weeks ago at Edwards, I was flying an F-16 at night on an auto-terrain following mission. I took off, and the F-16 had infrared pod, a laser targeting pod, and a laser ranging pod. I went out, dropped the F-16 down. I programmed into the computer the waypoints where I wanted the airplane to turn and the target I wanted to hit. Took the airplane out, pushed the throttle up to mill power, got up to 600 knots, got down to about 200 feet, turned it over to the autopilot, dialed in 50 feet on the altitude auto-terrain falling, and sat there with my arms folded and watched this airplane smoke along at 600 knots to a waypoint, turn, and follow the terrain at 50 feet to the target. That's technology for you. And in that period of time, both Andy and I were involved in flight test work for many, many years, from about 1950 on. I got into it in 46 and finally got Andy in out of recruiting about 48 or 49. And from that time on, we worked on ramjets, on P-80s, we worked on stability control on F-86s, gun firing tests on new guns, missiles, all kinds of stability and control, and weapons systems. We got an airplane above the speed of sound. We got an airplane out to 2.5 times the speed of sound. And we fooled around in all over the world flying foreign airplanes. Andy was up in Sweden flying the Viggen. He was over in England flying the Lightning supersonic airplane. And we've had one heck of a time. And just for the fun of it, 2 years ago, the Japanese government asked us to come over to Japan and do some flight test work on an XT-4, a little twin supersonic trainer. And we spent a week over there flying and evaluating. It wasn't worth a damn. That's about the way it's been. But we've had so much fun flying, and we still fly together in airplanes such as the P-51. We've been flying them for 51 years. You'd think we knew how. But consequently, we've enjoyed it. I'm real happy to get Andy back here to meet Sheriff McAtee, or ex-Sheriff McAtee, and his guys, because the whole drill team and all of the guys who have worked here in the Sheriff's Department, in fact, in the whole city of Indianapolis, have been really neat people. We've enjoyed it so much. And what Andy and I will offer to do, we'll answer any questions you might have, as long as it don't have anything to do with politics or sex. So, if you have a question, hold up your hand and ask it. And if it's for Andy, yes, sir, Bob.
Yes, sir. You shot one the first, you tell somebody about that, the first
ME-262, well, that's the first guy shot one down in our group. The ME-262 came along in the spring of '44, and it was the first production jet that went into combat, made by the ME-262. It was a twin engine, had two Jumo 004 engines in them. Went very high thrust, and it didn't have a very long life, but the airplane would do about 0.8 Mach, or about a little better than 550 miles an hour. And it was a very good gun, good airplane, in my opinion. Had Hitler dedicated the ME-262 to air defense, the war would have lasted from 6 months to a year longer. But he was a fanatical guy, and he dedicated the whole ME-264 to close air support, air to ground. And consequently, they didn't do very good. The first ME-262 I saw, we'd been briefed on the airplane on its performance capabilities and weapons of it, and we'd been escorting airplanes on a deep mission, and came back to the coast and dropped them off, and they headed for England. We went back into Germany, just looking for targets of opportunity, like we look for trains or trucks or convoys or anything that was adding to the war effort. We'd strafe it. And consequently, that was what was nice about the P-51 Mustang. The 51, you could fly it for 8 hours, and it was a marvelous airplane, and consequently, a very good airplane. It could handle anything that the Germans put up. And consequently, the 262, though, was about 100 miles an hour faster than the P-51 straight level. And I had my flight of 4. We just roamed around looking for trains and trucks, and we were floating along around 15,000 feet somewhere up in northwest Germany, and I looked down here. 3 little spots came into sight. They're going 180 degrees to us at about 8,000 feet, and boy, they were really smoking. When I first spotted them, we were clean and had about a half load of fuel. And I dropped the nose and opened the throttle and RPM up to max speed, or max power, and picked the airplane up to about 450 miles an hour and tried to head off these ME-262 coming this way, and I dove in and pulled in and behind them and squeezed off a couple, 3 bursts and got a lick or 2 on one of them, just 1 or 2 strikes, and they just disappeared into the haze, outrunning us. And then after about 5 minutes fooling around at 8,000 feet, ran into another single, and the same thing happened, rolled in behind him, and he left me. And then I finally saw an airfield down there, and we never strafed fields. You know, with some of the young guys or new guys who got in the squadron, you say, man, look at all those airplanes on that airfield. You tell them, you go ahead and strafe them, I'll give you top cover up here. And, consequently, I was looking at this airfield there and looked out about 3 miles on the final was the ME-262 coming in to land with his gear down. So I rolled over and came in behind him at about 400 miles an hour. Very unsportsmanlike, but as I was overtaking him, I opened up and blew his right wing off, and the guy hit about a half mile short of the runway, and that left me in a precarious position. Here I'm sitting, going like heck, about 200 feet above the ground, headed right straight for this airfield, and those guys all started opening up, and I went down the runway just about as low as I could get without hitting the runway at the prop, and these guys were shooting over top of it, and they did a lot of damage to their hangars, I'm sure. And pulled out the other side and came on home, and had some beautiful film of the kill. So that was the first 262 that was shot down in the group. In fact, Our group shot down more Me-262s than any other group in the European theater of operation, I think 17. In fact, our fighter group, 3 squadrons of 16 airplanes each, accounted for more than 700 German fighters destroyed. We lost a lot of guys, granted, but we did our job. Yes, sir.
You know, I read the Colonel Anderson's book, and didn't it say that he never got, did you never get a shot? I mean,
He got one little tiny hole.
is that good?
Lucky. No, he was a very good pilot, and he never got hit, except for that one, looked like 30 caliber through it. They came down and they filed it out and put a shilling in it, glued it in. He had good protection. Any other question?
Did you ever sneak in and out of Vietnam?
Sneak in? I spent 2 years over there
But
flying
I mean, did you ever sneak in somewhere where you weren't supposed to?
Like Korea, maybe?
from Korea.
No,
Yes, I did. Yeah, Andy and I flew her. I took Andy on his first combat mission in Vietnam. We killed a hell of a lot of monkeys over there.
You know, last night Chuck Yeager told you about that story he'd never let me forget, you know, where we were coming back after a very long mission from Berlin area. And we didn't know about jet streams in those days, and we had these 100-knot headwinds, and you're sitting on top of an overcast, and you're flying time distance. And, okay, I'm over the middle of the channel, you know, and I let down, and sure enough, I let down on the coast, the Dutch coast, just as we broke out of the overcast, and the whole sky lit up. They darn near blew us out of the sky. We all, 4 of us got back, but and he has never let me forget that story, because I was leading the flight and all this. Now I'm going to tell you about the time he tried to kill me. So this is a little more modern story. Of course, he tried to kill me several times, but I mean, this is the one that I remember. I was stationed in Okinawa, and he was stationed in Philippines, and I had F-105 squadrons in Thailand. And I took an airplane down there. They were flying combat, and we'd rotate the airplanes. And Chuck says, "Well, hey, I'll come down there and pick you up and get you and bring you back to Okinawa." And that sounded like a good deal. So, you know, it was kind of tough you had to get C-130 and fly over here and get on Air America, and it was kind of hard to get around. So I accepted that. And he came over to Top Lee and picked me up, and we went to Phan Rang, where he had B-57s, and sure enough, we did fly our first combat mission in Vietnam together in a B-57. Me riding in the back, and Chuck flying a B-57. But on the way home, now he's got this B-57, and we had to go to very high altitude to make it nonstop from South Vietnam all the way to Okinawa. He had to go over 40,000 feet. And of course, this airplane that he was the wing commander, and he had this airplane. It was, you might call it a war weary. Well, I remember one time flying wing on him with an M105, and he was leaking fuel so bad I kind of moved out here. I didn't know if it was going to blow up or not. It didn't have that much fuel. You couldn't put it in the bomb bay and all this kind of stuff. It had a cracked wing and a couple other things wrong with it. And so he says, we got to go over 40,000 feet to make it all the way to Okinawa. It was a pretty long flight, so we took off. He climbs all the way up, gets there. Oh yeah, it's a lousy airplane. It had hardly any pressurization. The cabin, as a matter of fact, I think the cabin was a little higher than the outside element. And we had been on a little party the night before with some of his troops there at Fan Rang and some of the other old friends that we had there, and I tell you, I wasn't feeling too good. So one of our old tricks, fighter pilot tricks, is you reach down and turn the oxygen on to 100%. And you breathe 100%, it makes you feel a little bit better. So I'm doing this, bringing it on, and I put it back to normal for a while, and I'm feeling bad, you know. I down there, turn it on again. Pretty soon he pipes up, he says, "Hey, are you on 100% oxygen?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, get off of it, because we're not going to make it to Okinawa. We're going to run out of oxygen before we run out of fuel." So I said, "Okay." So I'm off of it again. Boy, pretty soon I'm seeing stars, and they just, what the hell with it, you know. And I go back to 100%, and went along for about 5 minutes. He said, "You back on it? Are you 100% again?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "You know, there's something wrong here. I just feel terrible." And he said, "Well, get off of it, you know." So we go through this 3 or 4 more times. And he finally decides, hey, you know, we ain't gonna make it. So we landed in Tainan in Taiwan, where actually Chuck had a detachment there on air defense or on maneuvers. And we pulled in there, and Chuck got out, and he says, "Yeah, services, we're going to spend the night here, and hey, by the way, check the oxygen system in the back there. This guy, you know, riding with me, he's having a little trouble. I just want to see if it's all right." Well, about half an hour later, the crew chief came in. He says, "Hey, Colonel," says, "that thing isn't even hooked up." And what actually happened, the hose came up like this, and it was severed. And the hose was like that. It had a gap. So when you were on normal, you know, you were sucking the ambient, which was 41,000 feet. But when I went to pressure, it would blow a little bit through, and I was getting a little bit. And that's the story how he tried to kill me. And I ain't gonna let him forget it either.
Tell about our last mission.
Well, some of you heard about our last mission. You want to hear the real story? Tell you that. We got a million stories. We can tell you all kinds of things. Chuck Yeager's last night in London before he went home.
Yeah, that's the one.
You want let's see, I can tell you.
Page 69.
There's a lot of stories we could tell. Page 69 in that book.
That's the last flight in London.
Oh, shoot. Last mission, okay. This is no, now for the you weren't here last night. I got to know if you know the difference between a fairy story and a war story. A fairy story starts out once upon a time. A war story starts out, now this is no bull. And I'll give you the no bull story. Chuck Yeager and Bud Anderson's last mission. And I have to set you up first a little bit because you might think we were slackers or cowards or something if you if you just read it plain. But Chuck Yeager, of course, was shot down, escaped into Spain, was repatriated back to our unit, and actually went all the way to General Eisenhower to get permission to finish his combat tour. It's very unusual. If you were shot down, you went home, period. Because if you were supposed to be interned, and if you flew combat in and were shot down, you'd say, "Yeah, I'm Chuck Yeager." He said, "No, Chuck Yeager's down in Spain. You're a spy." You know, so there were a lot of rules on it. They could have tortured him and found out who helped him in the underground and things like that. So he didn't really have to be there to finish this tour. I was on a second tour. I finished one tour and was doing another one. And so I didn't really have to be there either. And I'll blame this on Chuck because I got the mic. We were coming near the end of our tour, and Chuck Yeager said, "You know, it sure would be hell to get shot down in your last mission." I said, "Yeah, you damn right." And matter of fact, we lost people on our last mission. Our squadron commander, Ed Hero, got shot down his last mission. Gabby Gabreski went down on his last mission. Not shot down, but went down. And matter of fact, I think Zemke too, same thing. So Chuck decided.
You were the ops officer, you were scheduling.
We decided on our last mission we would go out with the group as spares. Now these are the guys that go behind. You send 16 airplanes out, send 2 behind, and if somebody aborts, turns back and comes back for mechanical reasons or whatever, you fill in and on that. So, and then he says, now look, if they don't abort, he says, what I'd like to do is take you on a tour down in Switzerland. He had been down there in December on a conference, on an escape and evasion conference, and he said, that's a beautiful country, and there's a big chalet down there on Lake Annecy that I just got to show you. And he said, we'll go down there, tour around, come back. That'll be the end. We'll finish we'll count that as a combat mission and finish it off. Well, I was the ops officer, and so I could control the schedule, put the names up. So this day came about, the 14th of January, and we took off. The last 2 in our squadron took off. Nobody aborted, so when the time came, we'd cross over the channel. Would be our time to turn around and go home. We'd turn about 45 degrees and head for Switzerland. And now there's a couple things you got to remember about the old VHF radios. Once we separate a little bit, you can't hear each other talk. So we didn't know what the group was doing, and they didn't know what we were doing after we got a little ways, so we could talk to each other. We got down to Switzerland. Now this is in the dead of winter, January, and Chuck says, hey, there's Mount Blanc down there. Let's go down there and drop our tanks on it and strafe them and see if we can't set them on fire. Now look, I already told you 3 or 4 things we could have been court-martialed for. Now we're down there in a neutral country firing our guns and things like this. So we did that. That seemed like a good idea at the time. We went down there and shot up our tanks. They didn't catch on fire like Yeager says, you know. Now you have to watch Yeager. The stories that he tells, they happened. But you know, they might have been colored up just a little bit. But by God, they happened, I'll tell you that. That's for sure. And so after that, we went down into Lake Annecy, and Chuck found this chalet down there, and we blew the shingles off of it and the lake and things like that. Then we came across France, low level, all the way home. It was still partially occupied and partially ours at that time. And it was really late in the afternoon. The other 2 things you got to remember is that when you come back from a mission and you pull into your hard stand, the crew chiefs always look, the first thing they want to look at is you know, the condition of the airplane, the oil on it and all that. And if there's any gun smoke, if you broke the tapes on the gun, they knew you got into action, and they really, you know, they want to know what happened. So we had fired our guns, of course. Well, we were about the last ones to get back from this mission this day, and so we beat up the field, come in, landed. This is our last mission. Pulled in the hard stand. I noticed, hey, a lot of people in my hard stand. I mean, a bunch of people. I thought, uh-oh. And I thought, oh, no, this is my last mission. You know, they're here to wish me well and all this kind of stuff. Pulled in there, the crew chief jumped up on the wing just as soon as that prop stopped. He says, Andy, he says, the group shot down 57 airplanes today. How many did you and Chuck get? And that's the story of how Chuck Yeager and Bud Anderson missed the greatest air battle of World War II.
Let me tell you what really happened at the flyover today, Chuck.
Actually, the preacher, the reverend, got in a little bit of a hurry to do the prayer. The order was supposed to be the flyover, then the prayer. So when you guys came over, we were right in the middle of the prayer. And Noah,
General Brooks, I'd like to introduce Ed Bolin that was flying the
but I will say this. We promptly corrected it, and everyone just stopped praying and looked up, including the preacher. And when after you pass by, you pray. So it was a good flyover. You know, some of you may have heard Chuck tell the story that he came to Fort Harrison actually 2 times. I think they called it Citizens Military Training. And I think you came up from Alabama.
West Virginia.
West Virginia to do that. Yeah, that's right. I was scooping up on you and I'm trying to miss that one. But he came and was trained a couple of times. You know, in the fort now, after 92 years, we'll be moving our military mission out this October. And in another year or so, it will basically cease to exist as a military base. And Chuck, so I have a little special something I'd like to give you in remembrance of your time at Fort Harrison. Would you come up, please? We have published a book. It's sort of a pictorial history of the fort. It's called, and you've been around this kind of thing, called Retiring the Colors. And it goes back into history, and you can see, you probably can't find your old building, but you might bump into some things you know there. And it goes back, and there's some troop formations here. You might find a formation that you're in. But we want you to have this in remembrance of your time at Fort Harrison. And we're proud that we had a great American like you go through our fort. Thank you very much.